Hi, I'm Kris. I just want to start by saying thank you to GEEX for hosting this conversation with me and all of those folks out there that nominated my work this season. It's a special honor and especially affirming in this political moment. So thank you all.
GEEX, the Glass Education Exchange, welcomes Kris Rumman to the GEEX Talks lecture series. A few special guests, including Jamari Jackson and Dylan Sasano, will be featured later on in this episode. Support for this lecture has been donated by Light Bright Neon in loving memory of Annie Mae Pictou Aquash. Aquash was a beloved activist, teacher, and member of the Shubenacadie First Nation.
I'm a Palestinian American artist working with glass to create sculpture, performance, and installation. My work arises from a diasporic perspective. I often use the lens as a conceptual framework, kind of exploring this thing I think about as double vision as a means to expose or question dominant narratives and reveal their complexities or contradictions. Explore themes of home, which I think is kind of a universal theme, impermanence, precarity, and surveillance.
This season, GEEX Talks will feature segments on speakers' artwork, artistic practice, and direct conversations with the community. In this episode, Kris Rumman will discuss the making of 3 pieces, as well as a biosketch, Histories of Glass, a studio tour, a lightning round of rapid-fire questions, and 2 questions from the community.
I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, which is here on this little map. And it's a sort of dynamic place and also sort of a quiet place. It actually has the largest body of fresh water in the world. It has a tributary that leads to the Great Lakes, which also then leads to the Atlantic Ocean. So it's always been a part of a sort of strategic trade route. Another sort of element that shaped me growing up was also my larger extended family. There was this extended family that was like lively and vibrant and dense and loud and, full of life in this very early orientation to the world. I knew like my physical body existed here, but I was deeply connected to another place. And that place is Palestine. Palestine is really an amazing and interesting place. It is also an intersectional place. It's right on the Mediterranean Sea. It was historically a part of the Silk Road and the spice trade. So a lot of goods were going through, a lot of movement. It's the Fertile Crescent. It's sort of like the origins of civilization are from this area. Also religions, the 3 major religions came out of this area. So it's a really has a very historical, very contemporary political importance. My dad grew up in right outside of Bethlehem, was born there in 1967. As you can see, the loss of Arab controlled land, Palestinian controlled land has proceeded into this very current present moment. As many Palestinians were escaping violence, forced migration, or were forced to become refugees. My aunt still lives there. This is our family home. We still have it. It's right outside of Bethlehem. And you can see, just like we gather here in the States, big gatherings there too. Just a really warm and incredible culture to be a part of and learn that generous spirit that I think is so deeply a part of the culture. My aunt, who's still there, has lived a really different life than my family that came here. She stayed because if you quote, abandon your home or leave for reasons of self-protection or reasons of force, your home would be liable to then be confiscated. So as a strategic move, my grandfather asked her to stay in our family home, which we still have there. This is her shop here. And as many people were forced from their homes or left out of fear and locked their front door and thought, oh, I'll be back in like a couple weeks when it dies down. Um, they lock their front door, have their house key, and have never been able to return. So she actually is the keeper of many people's house keys, which is a really powerful symbol in Palestinian refugee history and present. Like my imagination of Palestine was always living in this sort of intangibility. And it was also framed within a certain era because that's when my family came here, like the Palestine I knew about growing up was from 1967. So it sort of was frozen in the time. And in certain ways, I idealized it a lot. So I love this image because I think it holds this like duality that I think is really important in my work, which is like this sort of like idealization of like what we might think of Palestine from stories from our grandparents, from this beautiful, lush rural land. Just outside of that frame is a different kind of reality. I always felt with that this sort of split, something between two worlds, or not quite enough one world and not quite enough another world. And so I think that for a long time that was very embarrassing for me. It felt like a deficiency. I didn't know my mother tongue. When I go to school, I would have like the weird lunch. So I just always trying to figure out where I fit and if I fit anywhere. Come to find out that actually that's very common. And I think maybe many people out there might have had this experience of having one culture, but growing up in another. Apparently, it's called a third culture kid. I found out about this term pretty recently, like only like a couple years ago. Children who spend their formative years in places that are not their parents' homeland. I listened to this podcast called Two Queer Arabs, and this amazing artist, Yasmin Nasser Diaz, talked about that actually not being a deficiency, that space, that liminal space between is actually a sort of an empowered space, that we are actually processing a certain kind of multiplicity. And that was like the first time I actually felt, wow, this is an empowering place to be. So if anybody out there is feeling that way, just really dig into that. Maybe we know something about these places. Maybe that's our work to blend. This is also an incredible quote by an author that and a thinker that has been really influential for me, Edward Said. And he writes, the more one is able to leave one's cultural home, the more easily one is able to judge it and the whole world as well, with the spiritual detachment and generosity necessary for true vision. The more easily, too, does one assess one's self and alien cultures with the same combination of intimacy and distance. I'd like to share an artwork with you. I'm going to start by describing the work, what you might perceive, and then talk a little bit more about some of the questions and concepts that informed that, and then maybe some things that I learned along the way. So, the first element that you might perceive of this work would happen just at like the tip of your nose. Like you might smell something, maybe familiar or maybe a little foreign. But if you follow your nose, it would lead you to a dimly lit room washed in an orange light. You might notice some vertical elements, a structure that is like a metal framing, a doorway, a sort of like mirror doorway. You might also notice there are windows or references to windows in the room. They're made of stained glass, mirrored stained glass. The designs hold some geometric forms. You might also kind of move beyond this wall and into a space that's highly patterned on the floor. You see kind of these decorative tile patterns and sort of earth tone colors. As you walk on this ground, you notice that it's actually not stable. That as you walk, the tile patterns are disrupted and disturbed. And this is this space. There's many different rooms in this space, different sort of patterns in different areas. This is a project I call local. I use mirror, two-way mirror. It's a material I really think about a lot and use in my work. A lot of pattern, tile pattern, and the material that is made of is actually spice, different kinds of spices. I want to talk a little bit about the sort of elements that are material, and then I want to talk a little bit about the elements that are more impermanent. I think about doorways in the sort of conceptual frame of a door is about a sort of physical negotiation of space. It's a boundary, it's a border, it's a decision about opening and closing or inviting in or not. But a window exists in a different way in my mind. It's a place where we can put our imagination, our stories, our dreams. If we think about churches, stained glass windows are always these places of sort of storytelling. And so these were sort of the elements that were in that room. The patterns are actually based on Palestinian floor tiles. It's this incredible book that I found that not only is an amazing reference book, but these actual tiles and the patterns you're seeing are from actual homes throughout Palestine. And the creation of this book allowed those houses to then be protected under historical guides. So it's sort of a reference book, but also a sort of like it has an action around it. So it was really cool for me because when I'm reading this, like this is actually from somebody's house and Palestinians know each other. So like it's like, oh, maybe like I know my Baba knew this family, this family. So it's also a little gathering place. These tiles come out of a really cool tradition. You might see them in Spain, might see them in other places. But that's again that information exchange. In Palestine, they're made with a sort of a colored cement on the top and then backfilled with other cement. And there are just a few shops that still are making these in the traditional way. I wanted to make a place for myself, not just for myself, but for my family. So I wanted to build this house, this sort of theoretical home. I asked my Baba, my father, like, if we could sit together and he could think with me about what are the patterns that he remembers to be in his house that he grew up in. He hasn't been there for 40 years. This is our house. As we were looking through this book, he was remembering, oh, I think this is the pattern, and that is the porch around the house. This is the pattern that's like leading up to the front door, and like this is the pattern, in the main room. So I got to put together this sort of imagination, this imaginary place for us. I built it with spices, as I mentioned. I worked with an amazing graphic designer who helped me to make these templates out of plexiglass. And I could just sift these spices through the patterns. Some of them were complicated. Some of them were actually 3 layers or 4 layers of spices. So each pattern was like making a print of multiple passes of different spices. This one here that we're seeing is sumac, fennel, which is delicious. The background is a sort of granular sand. And then there is, the yellow one is like a cumin. So these are all spices that are used in Palestinian cooking traditions. And I was really interested in scent because it works kind of behind the mind. It like works on a different, like ancient system, it's really connected to memory. And I thought, okay, if I could make this place, this inviting space, then if you smell this, now maybe it reminds you of something you've smelled before, but if you've never smelled that before, maybe it makes an impression for a future interaction with that smell. So, kind of like putting this little element in for a reminder or for future. I also was interested in using orange light because, again, from these sort of like embodied psychological perspectives, I did a lot of research about how different light tones actually shift your brain waves. And so, orange light actually opens up creativity. And I think with creativity comes openness. And so, I was hoping to create a space that was warm, open, and condition the viewer to receive that in this sort of pre contextual way, pre intellectual. Part of what was important for me was not just this place I was building, but it was sort of assertion into these gallery spaces and actually a question for the viewer about what do you do with this space? Once you recognize that you're marking or changing this space, what is your responsibility? And I learned a lot. I performed making these tiles, and then the space would be empty and it would be kind of unwatched or and I asked the galleries to just have very little conditions for people, just curious to see what permissions people would allow themselves. My commitment to the work was that no matter what, I would come and lay these tiles. When it showed in New York, it was quite a distance for me. So I would go every 2 weeks and lay those tiles. And in those gaps, things would happen. Sometimes the patterns would be there, and sometimes I could see marks of little footprints delicately walked. And sometimes I saw entire areas swiped away. And it really was information for me about what does it mean to have a space, to claim a space, and give permission to viewers to address that space as they saw fit. So actually, it was a very painful work. Eventually, it was very tiring for me to do that. I think I released my sense of control, and I think it left me with a lot of hurt, but also a lot of information. When I was a kid, just maybe like 8 or 9 years old. It was kind of a fall day, that crisp, like fall light, a little sharper, and the way that the sun moved past our window in the sort of fall time was that it would come through and it would pass this beam of light right onto our kitchen table. And I walked into the kitchen, I saw this cup, this like kind of goblet shaped cup, and in it was a little bit of water. When I walked over to it, I saw this kind of like cosmic alignment between the sun, this glass, and then what happened was this projection of both a shadow and a refraction kind of simultaneously. And something about that really like captivated me. I sat and I played with that glass of water for like quite a long time, just seeing something, what was happening, these sort of like invisible kind of magical things, as a kid, there's rainbows and other things. So it's just kind of like this basic situation, but in that basic situation was this incredible moment for me. Later, in thinking about why was that so important, I think it wasn't just a sort of this like cosmic awe of that moment, but it was also that this material, this little glass on a table, was revealing something that I couldn't perceive with my naked eye. It was showing me imperfections in the glass that were beyond my visibility. It was showing me something about light and how it moved through an object and water. And for that reason, I just was, I thought this lens was sort of like a magical tool. The lens was this sort of magical object that could reveal something beyond my own perception, my own kind of worldview. And that impacted me really deeply. And I think it still, in a philosophical way, impacts the way that I think about my work. I also want to share a little bit about glass technologies that also, in my own imagination, I think as artists, we kind of can give ourselves permission to sort of like have these expanded histories or and use speculative imagination or sort of like Afrofuturistic thought to sort of frame these histories. So in one way, I like to think about the different technological inventions of glass, which are sort of strangely aligned with places that I've lived or am connected to. The conception of the blowpipe, the first idea to make a tube and insert it into a pot of hot glass and blow breath into it, actually occurred in the Syrian Palestinian region in 50 BCE because of archaeological evidence. That actual location is a bit contentious. A lot of archaeological sites also are sites of kind of the production of knowledge. And currently, a lot of the sites throughout Palestine are operated by Israeli archaeologists and also other universities and international universities. So, this fact, I think, is kind of um, an interesting one to think about in terms of that relationship to how that information is shared. Dima, another speaker that will be in this series, works with these concepts of archaeology really profoundly in her work, working with like archaeological glass and institutional spaces. So I'm excited to hear more about how she frames that. The advent of the blown glass allowed for goods to move around the world again in Silk Road. In early Roman and Greek times, could be filled with water, and this was like some sort of exploration of the first lens. Very similar to my moment as a kid, these somehow these things track through time. Another huge influencer in the world of lenses and optics, Ibrahim Al Hafem, who was born in 965 and lived to 1040. He was an Arab scholar, mathematician, astronomer, and is considered the father of modern optics. He made significant advances in our understanding of visual perception. And that really led to the lens. I think the lens is such a powerful shaper of society and actually our world. The lens helped us orient ourselves not just optically. We could see our world differently, but also oriented us in this like larger framework of the universe. The telescope arose from this, and we started to understand disease in a different way. This paradigm shift between the sort of empirical knowledge and other forms of knowledge really arose. This became a contentious thing during the Age of Enlightenment, a split between science and religion. And I think about that as a powerful moment in history because we are starting to understand what information is priority, how that information is passed, and what is necessary for that information to be proof. So, a lot of indigenous and other cultures use many different forms of intelligence. There's apparently nine. What was prioritized was a sort of like intellectual knowledge or knowledge that could be observed visually. So, that knowledge exists in sort of like this place. But our bodies are really powerfully sensitive tools that perceive all sorts of things. And I think this was part of this like chasm between our perceptual being and our sort of logical being. And I think that also connects to Western and non Western ways of knowing. In Toledo, Ohio, where I grew up, there is this incredible glass factory called Pilkington Glass. They produce float glass, which is the kind of glass that is like the skin of modern cities. It's those big sheets of glass that cover all of these huge high rises and buildings. They offer this residency program through the Toledo Arts Commission, if you're into float glass, this is a great one for you. What this program allowed me to do was to think at the scale of a city. This material is covering our constructed world, our cities. I think about architecture as a sort of a physicalized version of society's values. How do we interact? How are those structures made? How do we navigate them? So this was really exciting for me. And I came across this thinker called Maslow. He was like an early psychologist and kind of introduced this idea that was like, rather than people being like crazy people and having these ailments, he started to think about people as conditions of their world. And I thought that was very generous, to really be more expansive about how and who we get to be based on circumstances. So he came up with this idea called Maslow's hierarchy of need. And at the base of this pyramid is like your basic needs, like food, protection. If you have those in place, then you can kind of like get to the next level. And at the very top of the pyramid is self actualization and transcendence. Wow, like how amazing would it be to like really be working at those levels? But in order to do that, you really need to have some other things in place. What does it mean when those basic needs are never met? What does it mean to be in a constantly kind of precarious situation where you're just continuously in survival mode? And what would architecture look like for that? So I proposed this project called Bodybuilding. I really wanted to center a human body, a person, because I think that's sort of how Maslow conceived of the world, that we are all these sort of sponges that are absorbing our context, and also these buildings are for us, like for people. So I was interested in responsive, reciprocal, mobilized architecture, something that could be covert. I believed in the urgency of architecture that is flexible, clandestine, as a matter of survival. To begin these monumental concepts, I offered this project Bodybuilding as a performative sculpture that consists of a responsive glass plane that transforms in appearance and function. Acting as a skin, this glass reciprocally reacts to the structure or the body beneath. It acts as camouflage into its environment and an amorphic shield. Working with this particular glass, mirror view, this is a glass that I used in my other projects like Local. And I was very interested in this material because I think it itself embodies a certain kind of power dynamic. If light hits it from the front side, it becomes a mirror and reflects. But if light is behind it, it is transparent and you can see what's on the other side. So if you think about like a cop movie, and there's the detainee on one side in the lit area, that's a mirror for that person. But on the other side, maybe all of the people that have the control and power are on the other side and kind of can observe. So I wanted to sort of explore that and think a lot about surveillance and how to obfuscate ourselves, the necessity to be visible or invisible, and what that means for people living in very precarious situations. So I started to construct with these materials. I started to think about joints that could move and bend, different possibilities of verticality, volume. I also was working with the glass in a flat surface, a plane. Again, thinking about joints. I did a lot of material exploration around what like makes a good flexible long-term joint. I talked to a lot of different companies like 3M. I got really familiar with their R&D department to sort of sort out what kinds of materials could both hold shear weight, also could do a pretty extensive articulation. And then I just started to play and explore what that meant for my own body and explore those ideas as an embodied practice of movement. At the time, I was taking an improvisational dance class, allowed for me to move from this sort of intellectual place into a physicalized space. I'm captivated by performance. I think there's something really powerful about what happens when somebody can transcend these experiences and give them back out. What are the shapes a body makes when it needs to be protected, when it's sheltering, when it's lifeless? I also integrated emergency blankets. So all of the joints are actually a cut emergency blanket. It's actually made in sort of units, and these units can zip together and become larger and larger and larger. Initially, I got to show that piece with the residency, the Momentum Intersection at the Toledo Museum of Art and University of Toledo, was where all the work was exhibited. And then I actually had a chance to show it in New York at Urban Glass, where I thought, okay, so now with the built, let's see what it can do. So I was able to think about it differently and change its orientation from this verticality into a sort of a horizontal. The question was, how much do you really need to stay afloat? What is the least amount? And so this piece was actually just counterbalanced with these objects. It also was like malleable and bendable and kind of moved like a puppet. Later in that exhibition, I was able to work with my professor, who was a dancer, who was the one that I took this improvisational dance class with, and we created a performance. I think sculpture sort of holds the story simultaneously all at once. But the gift of working with these incredible dancers was that it kind of created a beginning and an end to the story. So it was thinking about migration or forced migration or sort of these populations globally that are leaving their homes for political reasons, for reasons of violence, for reasons of disaster, and then making these incredibly treacherous paths to try to find safety or a place to build. As I look at these images now, some of the ways that the body is interacting with the piece, I am reminded of images that I'm seeing coming out of Gaza and bodies that are covered, are not alive, that are carrying their belongings on their backs. So I think that there's more potential with this work, and I'm excited to work on it with another dancer. So the next piece I want to share with you is called Watchers. My visits to Palestine in my physical body are limited and also fraught with a lot of challenges. I often visit through this tool, which is Google Maps. I think about Google Maps a lot, actually, as a really powerful tool for the production of knowledge. How do we know about places? This often becomes a sort of reality, a reference of reality of these other places. When Google Street View came out, I was really interested and I was tracking this. So I was looking at what places in Palestine were accessible, what were not. When I grew up, we looked at maps. Like I was like, okay, I'm here. I'm going to get in the car. I'm going to go there. I have to look at this map. I have to orient myself on this greater plane. But now using Google Maps, I'm always the center of the universe. And so the world is shaped around me. So it decentralizes our relationship to this larger world. For many years, I've been looking at Palestine, and I noticed when Street View occurred that I could walk down some streets in Bethlehem. And on one hand, how amazing is this? Like, wow, like I have access. But on the other hand, there's this other kind of sense of doom because being visible also in a place like that comes with a sense of vulnerability, like a very real sense of vulnerability. So I think as we move towards these systems of AI and street cameras are normalized, they're for our protection or are they for our tracking? I think these are very relevant questions happening. Watchers began as a way of contending with some of these questions. On one hand, it's personal access to a place that I can't physically visit. On the other hand, there's a kind of a digital colonization of how Palestine is represented. In fact, some of the language on the map itself changed in front of my eyes over the years. Like some areas were written in Arabic or English, now are written Hebrew or in English, even in Palestinian territory in the West Bank. So I'm wondering about the neutrality of these tools. Certain areas that are considered illegal by the World Court, like settlements, are basically neighborhoods built on Palestinian land. Those are all highly mapped and accessible through Street View, but many Palestinian towns that have been there and established are not mapped. So it's a very interesting question for me. In fact, I had mapped a lot of Gaza and tried to visit this place that is really inaccessible for most people. And on October 26th, Google Maps removed much of the imagery that was available on Street View. Those are really particular and political moves. Basically, this project was just really embracing my position as an outsider looking in and using the tools at hand to be able to access my homeland. I sat with my father, who hasn't been able to visit our family home in 40 years. And we sat together and I made this video of us searching for our family home. So it's a dialogue between he and I looking for our house. The object looks like this. There's a sort of telescope like object on the very top with an eye scope. It's lying on top of a tower, a tripod, perhaps, a water tower, perhaps, sniper tower. And below it is a ladder that goes down to the ground. And there are some homes that I built referencing some houses that I found on Google Maps in Gaza and other areas. The video then was projected onto the sanded surface of the glass. And so this object actually held the image as we watched. Hi, welcome to the studio. I'm excited and also a little nervous because when you share your studio space, you're in various parts of the process that usually don't get to be seen. So here we go. I kind of have some categories of phases I work in. The first phase is research and ideation, and then the sort of a material exploration. How do those materials align with the concepts that I'm interested in? Production is a phase that I think about as kind of realizing these ideas. And then a hard phase for me is editing. So that's a little bit about how I think about the different stages of working. And I'll share a little bit about different projects and processes. Okay, so research can look like a lot of different things. And like one is kind of like looking at theory or kind of larger ideas. I also take a lot of notes, and I kind of started this process of folding a paper in half and then writing notes on the front, interior, and then the back. So I have a little book for each day that I'm really in the studio. Also, I have like a bunch of books, and a lot of that info gets collected in Google Slides. Phase two, I'll share this kind of coin project in development. I'm developing a project with Nar Collective, which translates to fire or light in Arabic. We actually have never had the chance to all meet in person, but we've been working together for a year. So this ideation phase has been extended. Right now, I'm just kind of working out imagery, building, sort of a frame based on the coin. I'm thinking about, patterning historical ways coins are constructed, profiles, a lot of plant forms, you know, what does it mean to have a national identity? What are those icons? And so those are some of the motivating questions and trying to figure out how to work that out, especially when thinking about a future that's not defined by a past. What does it look like to actually exist in freedom and actually exist without necessarily being in a framework of resistance? I also will share with you this stage in another project. This is for bodybuilding, which actually I can share a completed work so you can see it all the way through. Early material development happened with, thinking about what is the structure that gives me the most possibilities for flexibility. And the triangle was something I was really excited about and, has a lot of, possibilities, flexibility. I did a lot of experimentation in like material construction, thinking about joints, like how do you join glass together, what types of adhesives, what kinds of materials are flexible. I was experimenting with, a lot of different ways of joining things, kind of like the assignment was how many ways can you put something together? This is silicone. This is also a different construction of the triangle. I also was really interested in this project using zippers. I worked with an artist that really knew how to make and alter zippers, which was its own whole thing. But how do you attach something flexible like a zipper to something rigid? So a lot of kind of material research on um, just processes. So this is the two-way mirror. This is a special adhesive that I like called 3M, and I'm like, what? How? This is what I'm trying to do. Can you help? What is out there? So really, like even going into like material, like companies that are developing these materials for various processes, and then kind of like ad hoc using them in your own, way. Um, the zipper allows for these sort of different expansions and contractions, or this also can zip to another piece. So that's kind of after all that development research time, I could kind of compile that into a completed work. And then that, once it was built, has its own possibilities. What happens now that it's made? I was able to work with performers and dancers to activate it. So a lot of different phases of the process, but there's just a little slice.
Okay, Kris, so now we've got the lightning round questions, and we're going to try to run through these really quickly.
Okay.
How would you describe your work in 3 words?
Responsive, reciprocal, glass.
What about 3 emojis?
Oh. Black hole. I love that emoji. The sunshine and a watermelon.
What's something that recently had an impact on your studio practice?
I have to say, I was so impacted by a performance by a dear friend of mine, Latte Lulu Von Cole, who performed in a series called Undoxed at Jack's Art Space in New York. And her practice is an embodiment of so many things that I think about. And I find it to be completely and utterly awe inspiring to see somebody that takes all of that and can translate it through their body as the vessel.
Do you have a favorite artist or writer that you keep returning to?
Who? I think a foundational author and writer that I think about all the time and continues to be a part of the conversation is Edward Said.
What do you wish you had learned sooner?
Whoa. Uh, so many things. Finding those people in your world that are going to move through this like strange path we're all walking down, the arts, and really find those partners that are going to hold you up and that you can hold up along this route. So, yeah, just community, I guess.
What's a skill you'd like to add to your toolbox?
Oh, I want to learn like mosaic right now. I have a project that I'm working on, and I want to kind of embody and learn some of these traditions, and kind of strategies of organizing little pieces and thinking about them as architecture. So definitely mosaic.
How did the 2020 quarantine impact your practice?
Hmm. Glass is so based on equipment. It helped me to develop a different strategy for making. And I think really lean into different phases like research and ideation and just using what I had around me. I think it made me scrappier.
What's your favorite glass process?
Hmm. I guess there's something that is so um like the flow of making happens most easily when I'm blowing glass. It's just, it's about movement, it's about it's a choreography, it's these sort of silent communications, you're responding to a material. So I think it's just like my baseline and I like it.
If you could time travel, would you rather visit the past or the future?
No, the future.
What makes you hopeful?
I'm deeply inspired by so many people that are working towards liberation and freedom, and how they're able to maintain practices of hope and imagination and resilience. Um, so the youth, um, I look towards like leaders in the field. Um, but yeah, just folks that are working towards like profound liberation for us all.
My name is Jamari Jackson in Norfolk, Virginia, and I am in my second semester of glass at Old Dominion University. And my question is, which qualities of glass reinforce the themes of migration, surveillance, and identity in your work? How do you decide which glass process or processes to use to help demonstrate your ideas?
Jamari, this is a great question. Thank you for seeing that in the work. I think a lot about reflection and that particular material of two-way mirror, which has this quality of what's visible, what's invisible. So like the material quality of that specifically really like started my brain thinking. And then I think about the lens a lot. One of the major kind of influences for me, or just like a shift in paradigm, was an artist named Hito Sterol. Her project is called How to Not Be Seen. Um, and I loved it. And I would recommend, I think you can see it online, it's free and it's very good. And it's sort of helped me to conceptualize being visible from a distance and kind of satellite imagery and how that's changed our way of orienting to the world here. So that kind of expanded my thinking of the lens. I also work with projection. So images like ghost images, things that are sort of unstable or unfixed. And I think that speaks to themes of migration, or a lot of the way that I understand Palestine is through a lens and through these video images. So to sort of put that back into the space and using projection. So those are some of the things I think about. Thanks for the question.
Hi, my name is Dylan Sasano, and I'm a junior at Punahou School in Oahu, Hawaii. Can you share any collaborations or shared projects that have deeply impacted your perspective or approach? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Dylan. That is like actually perfect timing and very relevant. I'm here at Penland School of Craft, which is an awesome place, for a month-long residency with our collective, NAR Collective, and we'd love to share a little bit about what we've been doing and how the process of collaboration has been going. Okay, so a little bit about NAR Collective. Currently, we're a 3-person collective focused on glass craft traditions from the Levant.
And we're working with a lot of research and motifs and archaeological ancient glass artifacts that are from that same region, the Levant.
Hi, my name is Zahra. I am one of the members of NAR Collective, and I am Bangladeshi Norwegian American. I am participating in this collective, and in doing so, I hope to pay homage to the historical camaraderie between Bengali and Levantine people in all of their struggles resisting colonization and preserving their cultural heritage.
And I'm Najah. I'm a Syrian American living in Oakland. For a little more context on what we mean when we speak of the Levant, we're referring to the modern day countries of Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Jordan, whose borders were formed by the French and the British. Before their colonial rule, families were very mixed, religiously mixed, ethnically mixed, and were able to sort of move through that land and that region freely.
As a group, we are collaborating cross-generationally, which means that we're all also at very different stages in our careers. We hold different knowledge and different skill sets, and we're really able to bring those things together. One of these ways that we're sharing our skills and knowledge right now is that as we're in these separate studios, Najah is in flame working, and then me and Kris, we started out in the kiln casting section. We were able to put our skills together and create a really interesting way of building stacks of coins to apply to the headdress that we're working on in the studio. I have a background in digital fabrication, so I was able to design and 3D print these little coins, and then we started working with a strip of coins that even after 3D printing, we can heat up again and bend and create these nice, curved coin stacks that can fit around the headdress that we're making.
When we first started the residency, we really just jumped in and started making things. And early on, we sort of realized there were 3 sort of goals that we needed to focus on. So we did want to provide a little bit of space and time to work on our individual practices and form our own ideas about making. And then second, our collaborative conceptual art making work together. And then the third was our archival work and documenting what it's like to run a glass studio under occupation. So our work together really felt like sort of this merging of homelands and our lives growing up in America. Felt like a really natural way for us to work together.
Yeah, the balance between the autonomy of the individual and the nature of collective working, and how to really have those sort of healthy exercises and be able to lift each other up and make sure that there was space for all of those things to occur. And I think truly if we're thinking about future and what a future looks like for artists in general and people in general, I think it is, for me, it's about collective work. Part of what we've been doing here also has been collectively reading and looking to other sort of streams of thought. Futurism, Afrofuturism and Arab futurism, has been deeply influential. And this incredible book that has been really inspiring, it's called Everything for Everyone. And it talks really about the power of collective work, especially in post-imperialist and capitalist society. So it's a set in the future, but near future. And it really got us to think about how much innovation has been happening in Palestine and under occupation, and that perhaps Americans can look to Palestine for solutions for our own survival. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my work and the work of our collective. It's been a really amazing process to be able to be here with you, hear all the questions that have been asked, and to be a part of this incredible organization. GEEX, thank you. It's awesome what you do for this whole glass community and for each of us and for me personally. So thank you for the work.
Thanks for joining. If you enjoyed this lecture, check out previous Geeks Talks episodes featuring Raghavi Bhatia, Anjali Srinivasan, and Luisa Bastos Lages, exclusively available for subscribers in the Geeks Talks archive. The Geeks Talks lecture series features artists and researchers nominated by a community of glass educators, artists, and learners. For anyone seeking their path in this field, Geeks offers you a record of predominantly BIPOC and queer fine artists, craftspeople, scientists, historians, designers, community organizers, and more, working with glass in traditional and unconventional ways. At its essence, GEEX is a grassroots project which has been bootstrapped together by a community that believes in the importance of this effort. Accordingly, GEEX relies on subscriptions, partnerships, and donations to make our public programming possible. GEEX Talk subscriptions are available to institutions like colleges and universities, and individuals outside of academia, whether graduated, self-taught, or curious about glass. You can subscribe or donate to GEEX by visiting geeks.glass/support. Speaker honorariums are drawn from subscribers and supporters. Many thanks to institutional subscribers for believing in the Geeks Talks project. Support for GEEX comes from viewers like you and makes all of GEEX programs and resources possible, including the GEEX Writing Center, BIPOC Community Table, Flame Affinity Group, and GEEX Educators Group. Thanks as well to our organizational partners. Organizational partnerships are intended for craft schools, glass schools, museums, cultural institutions, art service organizations, and really all organizations interested in enriching their resources outside the bounds of their walls. This season of Geeks Talks, specifically the Geeks Shorts format, has been supported by the Wisconsin Special Projects Grant from Ruth Foundation for the Arts. The Wisconsin Special Projects Grant aims to build a robust and equitable arts ecosystem by investing in initiatives that rethink and reimagine past practices, bring an expansive range of voices into public and artistic discourse, and contribute to a more complex and abundant understanding of the histories, lived experiences, and futures of this region. GEEX is based in Madison, Wisconsin, the birthplace of American studio glass. With the support from Ruth Foundation for the Arts, GEEX reconnects Wisconsin's glass history by revitalizing the narratives that define the field in a rapidly changing market, academic, and professional landscape. Thanks to Light Bright Neon for sponsoring this episode. You can follow GEEX on social media at Geeks Glass on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Sign up for our newsletter to learn more about upcoming programs and events. Finally, many thanks to Jamari Jackson, Dylan Sasano, Najah Alboushi, Zahra Siddique, and especially Kris Rumman. And of course, thanks to you for listening, sharing, and supporting Geeks Talks. Stay tuned.